Tobias Specker is a German Jesuit who is professor of Catholic theology, but he also graduated in Islamic theology. He is professor for Catholic theology in the light of Islam as at Sankt Georgen Graduate School of Philosophy and Theology in Frankfurt. The title of his paper today is Islamic Theology at the State Universities in Germany, Concepts, Experiences and Challenges from a Christian point of view.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to speak to you. I would be even more glad to be with you. I remember a very beautiful meeting, a conference in Warsaw some 3 years ago. But today is our exam day for our students. So I had to be here. I'd like to share my screen. Michael already said my topic is Islamic Theology at the State Universities in Germany. So I'm also speaking from my own experiences as I graduated there already 10 years ago. So 2010 to 2013 in the first generation of students of Islamic theology, but I kept my lines and correspondences to the institutes during my teaching and research now. So what I want to do, the way I want to go with you the next 20 minutes is I just have a brief remark before starting an unknown part of Islamic science. Then, of course, I'm looking at the establishment during the last 14 years. Then a little bit on the content and the students. Then I share some own experiences and I close with some open questions, topics, and to be discussed later. So just a very brief remark. So we have a long tradition of Islamic studies in some European countries, also in Germany, starting with the 19th century, which was primarily philological and historically oriented. So you can think of Theodor Nöldecke's Quran, examination, chronology of Helmut Ritter's studies here in Frankfurt and in Turkey, on Josef van Es doing in Tübingen, doing his big studies, large studies on Kalam, on systematic theology. But a special feature is that in addition to the research tradition in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century in Germany, which was orientated at the German imperialism, nationalism, and cooperated strongly with colonial interests, and is therefore also part of the critique of the so-called Orientalism by Edward Said. There is a second, not so much known part of the history, which was a separate tradition of German Jewish Islamic research, which was closely linked to the establishment of Jewish studies and also of Jewish emancipation in the 19th century at German universities. So I just show you two faces and one book. So you see on the left with the long hair and the glasses, it's Abraham Geiger. On the right, it's Gustav Weil, and the book is from Joseph Horowitz. Just three names very known from the 19th century. So that's not only history from my point of view, but I think there is a certain line, a certain analogy between this establishment of the German Orientalism from the Jewish part and the establishment of Islamic studies around 150, 180 years later, because the establishment of the Orientalism was also due to a search for a place in the German academic and also in the society of the emancipating Jewish community. And on the other hand, it started to apply academic methodology on Jewish studies in strong contention and struggle with the rabbinic tradition, with the Orthodox tradition, and so gave the own intellectual tradition a new academic frame. And a little bit you can see from my point of view the same struggle with the dual concern of finding a place in the society and applying and formulating the tradition from an academic point of view now in the last 15 years at the German state universities. So that's just a remark. So I basically show you some pictures and that you have some impression of persons also. How Islamic theology came about. So the decisive point was 29 January 2010, if you have a concrete date. On this day, the Scientific Council of the German government gave recommendations for the further development of theologies and religion-related science at German universities. And it's a long text, but it gave two main insights that on the one hand, the structure which was up to now established, that you have somehow non-religious, neutral, so to say, Islamic studies, like religious science on the one hand, and then theology, which was basically Christian theology from the basically both confessions, so Protestant and Catholic theology so you have this dual system. This does not reflect the social reality in Germany anymore, with the more than 4 million Muslims living here, this time already in the fourth generation. In addition, second reason it reflected, there's an inner Muslim need, primarily due to the lack of qualified personnel in Muslim communities, basically religious teaching at state schools and imams in the mosques, which should be trained in Germany, but were not up to now, up to this point. So based on this double insight, this council proposed to establish Islamic theology at state universities. A little bit the background, just to mention it, in Germany you have a special tradition of so-called positive neutrality of the state. On the one hand, it's very clear that there's no state church, state religion, not even a privileged religion from cultural reasons per se. So there's a cultural tradition, but there's no, on the question of juridical background, there's not a privileged religion. But at the same time, it's not the background of a strict secularism as you have it in France with the French model of laïcité. But it's rather a cooperation between religious communities and the state. Basically, it's the church, the juridical term of canon law is res mixtae, so mixed things and mixed questions between state and the religious community, basically in education, faculties, schools, but also cemeteries and pastoral care in hospitals and prisons. So this means that the state itself had a certain interest in establishing Islamic theology without being able to advise the content, although the state and I suppose the German society was interested in promoting an Islamic teaching which was fitting into a European European framework and academic context. This idea did not start at 2010. It was already, so had a longer history. So just to mention, in Frankfurt, for example, there was already endowed professorship from the Turkish Presidency of Religious Affairs, beginning with 2003, so after 9/11, and established in 2005. And the specificity of Frankfurt was that there was a history of Quranic studies. Even you can say something like a historical critical approach to Quranic studies from a basically background of Turkish theology, which was, at least in this time, a very open and a very critical theology. So you have had three professors, I suppose you don't know, but they are known in Turkish theology. So it was Mehmet Köktaş, Sankt Georgen, and now Ömer Özsoy. I just moved to one slide. It's the guy with a hand at his head, who was the main figure in Frankfurt for establishing the Islamic theology. So he was already teaching here in a guest chair, so to have. But starting with 2010, there were several centers established. So Frankfurt, I already mentioned, Tübingen, Erlangen, Münster, Osnabrück, and Frankfurt. So you have some of the faces here. So you have Muhammad Rashid from Münster, who is very prominent in a somehow liberal systematic theology. Then you have the not so known woman teaching Kalam history, Kayseri Freimut in Erlangen, so in Bavaria. Then you have Amina Umerica, a Bosnian-born theologian who is teaching in Frankfurt, basically from with regard to sociology of religion and Southeast Europe. And then you have Tübingen, a specialist for Sufism, basically, Erdal Toprakyan. So this is the frame 2010, which started. And now, during the last 14 years, even more centers were established in Berlin, a very famous center now in Hamburg is under construction, and Paderborn. And if you look over the frontiers of Germany, you have to mention Fribourg in Switzerland, which has a center for Islam and society, and Innsbruck and Vienna in Austria. Well, these are not all faculties. To be correct, there's no faculty at all in the moment, but there are institutes establishing the studies, mostly between 2 and 5, 6 professors. And then you have other mid-level staff and collaborators. Yeah. So this time, that was the academic institute, the landscape, so to say. So at the same time, you have to say that Jewish theology was strengthened. There are 2 main centers in Germany, in Heidelberg, which was already established, and then in Potsdam, close to Berlin, the Abraham Geiger College, which took over a liberal tradition of the 19th century, but was established in the last 10 years, or strengthened even in the last 10 years. And you have a positive backlash for Catholic theology. As in Berlin, there was no Catholic theology in a larger sense. Due to the establishment of Islamic theology at the Berlin State University, there was a Catholic institute established, interesting, from a socialist left-sided government who were somehow under pressure after establishing the Islamic theology to strengthen the Catholic theology. So thanks to our Muslim colleagues. So that's so to say. So you see, you are in a completely moving framework, in a moving landscape. So during the last 15 years, you can also see it's not only institutes which are established with some backlashes to Jewish and Christian theology, but there is also a development of differentiation of the institutes. So you can say, well, in a very broad sense, Osnabrück, which is should have been together with Münster, is more on a traditional so to say, conservative side. Münster is very on the liberal side. Frankfurt has its history with a strong support for Quranic studies, and Tübingen, for example, is strong in Sufism and also history of systematic theology. So there is a certain differentiation. So also as a student of Muslim theology, you can choose a little bit which frame, although the way of studies, they're more or less the same. So perhaps that's enough for the history. So let's have a second look. What to study? What do you study if you study? Which in the picture you see a non-academic way of studying the Quran. So meanwhile, all the institutes, they have the academic degrees, starting with a BA, MA, then the MAs for school teaching, primary school, and also grammar school degrees, doctorate, and even there are the first habilitations, so the second doctorate specifically for German, Austria, Switzerland context. They have this idea of habilitation. I'm not sure how it is in Poland. So to become a professor here, normally you have to have a habilitation after the doctorate. And there are the first German-born Muslims who did the habilitation, one or two as far as I see. What do you study? So, of course, you study language. So you need a foreign language from the school. So French, English, or Spanish, basically. Then, of course, you have Arabic, classical, which means classical Arabic, Quranic, and classical Arabic. And then you have a third language as elective language, so-called Islamic language, whatever this means, but from a Islamic context. So Persian, Bahasa from Indonesia, or Osmanic, for example. You have to do this, but in a smaller account. Then the modules which you're studying are organized first with some references to the classical Islamic teaching, to the Ulum al-Islamiyya. So you have Quranic exegesis, tafsir, you have the science of the utterings of the Prophet, so hadith. Then you have, somehow we can speak about this, which is interesting. It's not Islamic law, as it's useless in Germany and European context, but Islamic norms and also law studies, because a lot of hermeneutical questions in the Islamic tradition are asked in the context of law. So you have some of this Islamic law questions and methodology. Then you have systematic theology, kalam, and then the history of Islam. So these are classical subjects. Then you have some classical subjects which are strengthened in the German context in comparison to the classical institutions as you have in Egypt, for example, or in Tunisia. So ethics, adab, mysticism, and philosophy. Yeah, and then there are third category. There are new modules established, like religious education, religious pedagogy. Then a module like Muslims in Europe, Islamic aesthetics, and interreligious module. I will come to this later. And then you have some specific elective modules like feminist theology, philosophy of religion, Islamic banking. You can choose this as a deepening. So who is studying? So that was a very short overview about the content. Who is studied? So at the end of 2020, approximately 2,500 students are studying Muslim theology throughout whole Germany. When we started in Frankfurt 10 years ago, before 2020, so 2010, we had a generation. The first generation was about 110 students. basically Muslims, of course, because of the prospect of work, the career prospects. So basically there was one Jesuit, me, and I think another Orthodox priest who did it a little bit like a hobby, who came and participated but never didn't finish his studies. And some people just listening to the conferences, so from other faculties. So of course, as it's a state university, it's open to everyone. But as it's a little bit with a Christian theology or Catholic theology, without being a Catholic, you can study Catholic theology for interest, but it might be difficult to find a job with this afterwards. Interestingly, how many women-man relations? So 2020, the figures say that there were 80% female studies. So a huge amount of female studies. And even more interesting, 3/4 of the families came from the background of families which had no access to higher education, so so-called first-generation academics, which is very unusual. So that's interesting that 75% of the students were first-career academics, first-generation academics. The motivation of the students, due to the statistics, is they are strongly motivated to learn about their own faith and to help to shape Islam in Germany public sphere. But interesting, they are less focused on professional qualifications. So it's not a study you do in the first line to get a job, which is good because it's difficult to get a job with it. So the career prospects are somehow diverse, dynamic, and sometimes uncertain. Yeah, you can see this 2020, some years later, that nearly half of the students, graduated students, are working somehow in educational fields, in schools or institutes, university, and wherever. 26% are working in social work, and then only 13% are working in Muslim communities. So it's interesting, that the Muslim communities are not the first employee of the students of Islamic theology, which has certain reasons. Yeah, so let's come to the own experiences, and then I will do it briefly. So my first experience is, of course, the interreligious encounter. But which has a certain reason, because in difference to the Christian theology, the interreligious studies are part of the obligatory studies of Islamic theology. So as a Muslim student, or as a student of Islamic theology, to be correct, you have to study a module of another theology, whether Jewish or Christian, which means Protestant or Catholic theology. And also the teaching staff in Islamic theology includes a Jewish teacher of Arabic and a Kalam teacher who is Baha'i. So there is an interreligious dimension in the studies, but also in the staff. So the consequence is that the students have some knowledge of other theologies when they finish. And they are present in other theologies. So if you study now Catholic theology in Frankfurt at the State University, you have also Muslim students doing their interreligious modules, asking other questions than classical Catholic socialized students are asking. So that is an interesting new development. So that was my first experience interreligious encounter. I can tell a lot about it, but I will do it if you asked. The second is the most important. So inner Islamic diversity. My strong impression was the challenge for my co-students, who were also like 20 years younger than me, was not me as a Christian, not even me as a priest or as a Jesuit. That was somehow very well accepted. the great challenge was to notice how diverse the Muslim students are. So the co-students are in the Islam, the experience of inner Islamic traditions. So there were very different ethnic backgrounds from Pakistan, from Turkey, of course, in Germany, from Arabic countries, but also from Bosnia and also from Germany, converts or even people coming from a Muslim family in Germany. So then you have, from a confessional view, very different. So you have Sunni, you have, so the great majority is Sunni, but there are some Shiites, but also Ahmadis or Alavites. So that was a great challenge for the students to see how diverse Islam is, and to experience, third and last point of the diversity, not only under students, but also learning the Islamic tradition, that it's much broader than to be taught what is taught in the mosques as a more or less catechism, I would say, with a Christian term. It's more like a catechistic tradition, some moral values and some teachings, but the broad and very diverse tradition was a great challenge and experience for the students. So I would even talk of a subversive tradition. So let's come. Everything's okay? I hear some backlashes. Okay, good. So just the third point of experience was the questioning of the relationship between faith, practice, and theology, which is a challenge for every student of theology, not only Muslim, but of course there too. What does it mean to study academic theology from a confessional point of view, but still as an academic tradition with historical questions? And I want to underline that it's really a great, from my point, advance that the students study their religion with the methodologies they learned at school, like history, literature, science of literature, and even contact to natural science, and the question, how is the relation? So everything they learned in school is now there's a continuity to the academic research, which is also a challenge. And there was a big discussion about what is pious theology. Is theology pious or not? You can imagine that you have it, I suppose, in your own seminars yourself. So the last point, just to hint at some questions to be discussed. So the first point I want to mention, open question, is still what I just mentioned as an own experience, the question, how is the relationship to the lived Muslim life? So how is the relationship between academic research? Yep, I do, no problem. Academic research and the mosques, basically, is there a relationship? And also, as the German state cannot be responsible for the content, so there must be a relationship between the organized part of Islamic religion in Germany and the academic research. But what is the organized part of Islamic life, as there is no church, especially no Catholic church with a pope and bishops and so on? So, first question. They found some ways to go with this question, but they're still open question. The second question, which is related to it, after studies, is there something like a seminar for forming of imams? And they just founded a seminar for imams in Germany to continue the studies. The second point I want to mention is the role of women in Islamic theology. As you see, there's a high number of proportion of Muslim female students, but where can they work? And how is the relation, again, to the mosques and the question of representation? And the third point, to conclude, is to say, how is the social impact of the Islamic studies? So I already mentioned it's the first generation academics, so that's changing a lot in the families, but also all the identity questions of the young Muslims in Germany, which tend to be influenced also by radical movements. So there is a high need of qualified Muslims, theologians to intervene, to speak, and to be present, especially in social and digital media. Yeah. And a last point, what does it mean to our Catholic theology? But this is a thing I think you explore yourself, and we can speak about this later. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to discussion.